I can't help but think about what Melody was saying earlier. That statement of, but not everyone. Oh, that one hit me. I started thinking about that, so then what does that mean? Yes, Jesus saved, well, maybe he saved some people, right? Or maybe in this world today, he saves these kind of people, but then these kind of people he doesn't. In other words, if Jesus' love and saving grace is somewhat exclusive, where does that leave us? We're just on our own? How do you survive the hard times of life if you're on your own? And how many people in our world today have that perspective? I don't know about y'all, but I don't think I'd make it, not probably one day, to be totally honest. I certainly wouldn't be able to deal with some of the heartache and the tragedy and the tough things that I've had to go through in my life. I don't know how you would do that without Jesus at the center of your life. To not know the saving grace of God and to be confronted with that in such a just simple way from somebody oh, it's an obvious truth. Yeah, but not everybody. Just so casually, right? I don't know, that perspective to me, I think about how I would be able to survive those hard times. And, sometimes the times we live in are hard times. Some of you today are having a hard time. My voice is a little funky. Yesterday morning, I didn't even have a voice. Can you believe that? But God gave it back to me. Therefore, I must have something good to tell you today, right? We're going to go with that. But I don't know, I started thinking about that, life the hard way. The hard times, and then some people who just live life the hard way, right? Do you know anybody whose life's just been hard? Or maybe your life has been harder than your friend's life, right? Why is my life always harder than the other people around me? I think a lot of us have that perspective. It's subconscious sometimes of oh, it's so easy for somebody else. How come it has to be so hard for me? Or maybe you're a bit like me. Do you know anybody who has to learn the hard way? I don't know why. I think I'm just not as smart as I should be, but I have to learn everything the hard way, I had to make the mistake. I can't watch somebody else fall on their face. I got to go feel the pain of the face smashing, I just think about that, right? Living, learning the hard way. Maybe you know somebody that only ever takes the easy way. As we start to kind of reflect on some of these ideas from a spiritual perspective, is the walk with Jesus supposed to be hard, or is it supposed to be easy? And I think you can get mixed messages sometimes, and I want to think about that in maybe a new way, because I know people who have to learn the hard way, and I know people who only want to live the easy way. They always take the most convenient option. They're usually looking out for themselves. They prioritize their comfort and their safety over taking risks into scary situations, having to deal with other people. I think I'll take the easy way. Maybe I'll just kind of stay here on my own. Maybe take the easy way out. But, there's the hard way, there's the easy way, but which way? This is the way, Mandalorian, right? This is the way. When I start thinking about what is the way, I start thinking about the words of Jesus, and I think about the first Christians. The first Christians, they had so much so right, and it was so simple for them. And I think a lot of the times, I feel like I wish I could be in their shoes, That it's so simple, saw Jesus, walked, talked, saw resurrected Jesus, Pentecost happens, I wish in some ways I could be in that spot, but then you read about the lives of these early Christians and you realize the hard times they had to go through. I don't know if I want to sign up for that. That seems pretty rough, But when we think about the way, the hard way, the easy way, which way, the way, the early Christians were actually not called Christians first. They were first called followers of the way. So the first Christians, right, when they were called Christians, it was really other people oh, those are the Christians over there. But if you were to talk to somebody, they would say things like, I'm a follower of Jesus, I follow the way. Well, that has a whole different feel and flavor, doesn't it? Saying I'm a Christian versus I follow Jesus, I follow the way. I think one is more about a statement set of beliefs sometimes, and one's a little bit more about an action-oriented position, right? So, I follow, it's a verb, right? I follow the way. There's something that I'm doing as well, not just what I'm believing, but what I'm doing with my life. That's what being a disciple is following the way. It's following the path of Jesus. And the way was the unique path to God that these people who had met the living Christ had found. They had found the way. And when Jesus in John 14 said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus doesn't mince words, and what he says is that no one comes to the Father except through me. What Jesus is saying is there is a way, and I am the way, which is an exclusive statement. Also in Acts 9 it describes some of the early followers of Jesus, right? And it says, any there who belong to the way. And again, this is how the Bible kind of describes people that follow Jesus. And then even in Acts 24, there's this admission of, I worship the God of our ancestors as a follower of the way. In other words, this is how they describe themselves. Not just, I believe certain things, right? I think in our modern mindset, we have this set of beliefs up here somewhere in the thought cloud of beliefs, right? But what they're saying is that I am a follower of the way. This is the life that I lead. My life is lived differently. My actions that I take are informed by the life of Jesus. What I like about the way is what it's doing is it's describing a movement. It's active. It's talking about a path and a road and a place that we should be walking. I like that imagery for me, right? Because following Jesus has got to be more than just believing some right specific things. In seminary, they teach you these very big words that no one else in all of your life will ever use outside of a theological circle, right? But one of these is orthodoxy, right? Meaning right belief. And then there's orthopraxy, right action. There's belief and action in these things that are combined. And I think a lot of the time when we say oh, well, I'm a Christian, sometimes I think, and all too often, what people are actually communicating is that I have a set of beliefs that I ascribe to. But if I were to say I follow Jesus, well, now I'm telling you it's a way of life. It's action focused. There's something I'm doing, and I'm looking at where is God leading me. If there is a way, and Jesus is the way, and I'm following Jesus, it means I got to keep my eyes on Him, and I got to keep walking one foot in front of the other, reliant on Jesus in my life. In other words, Jesus is the pilot, I'm the passenger. I think a lot of people in our world today got that mixed up, don't they? In other words, I'm the pilot. Jesus, I guess you can come along if you want to, but I'm already going this way. We've been looking at some of the parables in Luke, right, called the traveling narratives. And this is Jesus moving to Jerusalem, Jesus moving to what would happen at the cross and His ultimate resurrection. These parables along the way in Luke are really informative because it's Jesus giving us words for the road. The Gospel of Luke is headed somewhere. The writer writes not only the gospel, but then Acts that describes the early church and followers of the way. And so when you think about these traveling narratives, Jesus is teaching along the way, and He's teaching very specific things for the believers that will help them in their next steps of their journey as followers of the way. And so as Jesus is moving toward Jerusalem, He's ultimately moving toward the cross. What you're starting to learn and see in these parables is that discipleship is a journey. We're supposed to be on the move. We're supposed to be moving forward, right? That discipleship, when we talk about the way forward, what we're talking about is actually moving with God into the future. So many people I know are either stuck in the circumstances they're in today, they're stuck in what has happened to them in the past. But really, following Jesus is about us moving forward. It's about us following His plan for our life into the future. That the way is about living a life worthy of our calling, that is to follow God. All right, so if our calling is to follow the way, is it easy? Okay. Or is it very, very hard? I think I would argue the latter. Sometimes following the way, following God, being a disciple of Jesus, I think is very, very hard. I think it's hard for several reasons. we don't get all the answers right up front. But let me bring it home a little bit more. Is following the way easy, like when people hurt you? What about when people lie to you? Does that get you? You know, is following the way easy when you've got opposition? Is following the way actually kind of hard sometimes, especially when people are mistreating you? I find it the hardest to follow the way in those times, to get past my own self-righteousness and anger in the moment, to get beyond my feelings of offense that someone is just lying to my face. Does that bother anybody? Or when someone hurts your feelings, right? Somebody just says something kind of mean about you. We have so many different coping mechanisms to get through that, right? Like some of us, we blow them off. I'll never talk to you again. I'll talk more trash about you. Where's the internet, right? But I think when we talk about following the way, it's got to be during the hard times too. And what Jesus talks about and preaches in his ministry is that following the path that he's laying out in some ways is easy, right? To accept the gift of God in Jesus. A lot of the time that's an easy thing. But to then go walk that out sometimes is real hard here on planet Earth where we're not in the perfect conditions, where there is things like distractions and temptations all the way around us, where things are not as they should be. We see pain and suffering in our world. And so, you know, what Jesus is trying to do is give us some inspiration and encouragement for the hard roads ahead. I think we need it. And in Matthew 7, it talks about, Jesus says, "Enter the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." You know, this is interesting because what he's saying is that the path that leads to destruction is actually quite wide and quite easy. And so sometimes it's actually quite easy to not be walking the way that we're called to walk with God. What he says is actually the way is narrow, and few find it. I mean, Revelation talks about multitudes here, right? So we're not talking about a handful. But what he is saying is that there are people who are going to miss out on the goodness of this life in our world today because they're more consumed with themselves, because they're more focused on their own satisfaction, personal pleasure, doing whatever they feel like in the moment, and they will just very easily be brushed on down that wide, wide road. And sometimes what he's calling us is to resist that, right? He's talking about gates and roads. And I think what's interesting is he also says, like, enter in through the gate. That's an action thing that we need to do. When we hear God calling us and we feel that sense of what we should be doing in our life, we want to step through there, right? And that's the call of what Jesus is saying, entering in. It's about sometimes doing the hard thing. Sometimes the hard thing is just forgiving people in your life that have done you dirty. You know, it also says, right, that Jesus is the door, right? That Jesus is the way. When it says that Jesus is the way, Jesus is that narrow gate. He is that narrow door. He is the one by which we can be saved. That's an exclusive claim of the gospel. A lot of people in our world today are offended by that. Only Jesus? Whoa, whoa, whoa. I got other things that I think about. My response to that is always, you, right? It's always, well, I don't like that. I kind of think God is like this. Rather than trying to seek out what God tells us, learn through that, and then live a life following God. These are really different perspectives, I think. They're two radically different ways to approach the world. Either we start with God or we start with ourselves. And I think in this sense, right, the way is narrow because it's the only way, and relatively few people get through that narrow gate, right? But many, many more will attempt to find an alternative route to God. The wide path is full of self. I. Me. What happens is if you're walking down that wide road, you're trying to find this alternative route to God, to peace, to satisfaction, to a sense of spiritual serenity. And what happens is you will start to try man-made regulations or rules. You'll try and find the right rules, the precepts, the 5 core principles of a healthy life, right? You're going to start to find rules and regulations, and somehow if you do those things, maybe that's how you get to God. Or some people is through false religion, the kind of religion that says like, well, the feelings and emotions that you experience here on planet Earth, you just need to detach. You just need to separate yourself from your emotions, right? Those are just things that get in the way. Rather than saying, no, your life matters, your mind matters, your feelings matter, your body matters. You here on planet Earth right now, here in this space and time, matters to the God, creator of the universe. That's not false religion. But that's what people are going to do on that wide, wide road, right? Is false religion. Or through self-effort, right? So whether it's rules or religiosity or just pursuit of self, the wide road's actually quite easy to fall into. Not trying to find where God's at. Not seeking and searching with our life to say, well, God, what do you want me to do? God, should I go talk to that person who I can't get off of my mind? Yeah, you probably should. In Luke 13 as well, he says, make every effort to enter through the narrow door, right? Make every effort, in a lot of translations, is strive. And the Greek word is actually very similar and sounds like our English word of agonize. In other words, it's kind of a weird translation thing, but what he's saying is that you should strive to hit the narrow door. Like an athlete strains and trains to achieve their mission and their aim. Like when Paul talks about running that race, like we should be straining and striving to live the kind of life that God wants for us. But to be very clear, all the striving in the world does not get us to a place of wholeness and peace. We should live that way because of what God did for us, because of God's grace in my life, that I've been renewed and remade and transformed in His image. Like I am a child of God. Now I'm ready to go work. I want to run. I want to find that narrow door. I want to do the hard stuff in life. As Christians in this world, we're called to do the hard things. We had an awesome sermon months ago, and that phrase has stuck in my head. We're here to do hard things, right? I want to do those hard things because of the grace in my life, but realize when people get this thing backwards and think, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to strive and I'm going to train and I'm going to strain and I'm going to try and get there so that I can get this sense of peace and satisfaction, that is ultimately always going to be fruitless because it doesn't start with Jesus in our life, who is here offering you a simple gift. Entering the narrow gate is still difficult sometimes, I think, because there's opposition, human pride. In our world today, pride is often described as something that's very positive for people, right? But the Bible describes pride as probably one of the most tricky of all sins. In other words, it's a sin that pulls you into all sorts of things. Why is that? Because ultimately that starts with the sense of self, right? This is the age-old question that goes all the way back to the garden. Are you going to let God be God, or do you want to be God? God or self? And the other things on that, right, like the human capacity to just love sin. I've heard people say it, right? Sin is fun. Or we could do what we do in kind of our, post-modern context, however you want to call the age that we're living in now in terms of the realm of reality and what's real and what's not. When you think about, well, we'll just say that just sin doesn't exist. Or we'll minimize sin, right? Oh, well, what you call sin is not really what I believe sin, because I think sin is kind of like this. And I kind of think that love is like this. Well, God says you can love the wrong things. The Bible's full of examples of loving the wrong things. And when we think about that, right, that this propensity for us to fall into those traps and get trapped in that prison of sin in our life, the opposition of Satan in our world today, his control of many facets of our world, when you start thinking about the opposition out there, how do you get off of the wide road that's easy to travel down? The reason why it says that few will find it is because it's hard. but I think we're here to do the hard things. And when I think about the way forward for us, right? Because right now in our world today, there's a lot of uneasiness. And as I'm describing some of this stuff, you're probably even more uneasy than you walked in the door today, right? Because now you're being faced with the reality of how easy it is to just be on the wrong track. Oh no! But if we're going to talk about what the way forward is and the kind of peace and transformation that Jesus really does offer us, like that rescue from the sin and the snares in our life, like the rescue from the destructive patterns that I keep falling back into. This is how I understand sin. Destructive patterns that I just fall right back into, and then I got to get out of. If I just stay there, then you just dig these ruts and you just never get out of the hole. But if you'll let Jesus lead your life, you can get out of that. You can get beyond it. You can be remade and transformed and renewed, which is the whole goal of the Christian faith. I think we got to face the tough stuff in our life. We got to face the hard things that are going on. And sometimes a lot of that's external, right? We talk about the state of the world and whatever. But like sometimes it's the stuff that's going on inside of me. Because sometimes like the mess that I see is a mess that I made. Like, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like I'm the problem. And I think a lot of people feel like that. And what's interesting as we listen to the words and the parables of Jesus, what's really fascinating here is that there's good news for somebody who feels like that. If you feel like you're the problem, or like, there's this song that I, from a long time, but, I am my own affliction, I am my own disease, I think I'm the problem, I lock my soul in a cage, right? Like, there's a lot of people in our world today who think that they are the problem, that the problem's somehow inside of them. That's the kind of people who think, yeah, well, Jesus saves, but like, not everybody. I can't get over that comment. When he talks about to strive, right? Strive to enter that narrow gate. There's hope for those of us who think that we're messed up. And it's not, yeah, but not everyone. It's, yeah, but everyone. The good news of the gospel is it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you've done. You can still come home to Jesus. He still loves you. He still wants you to come through that narrow gate. He's still fighting for you. He's doing everything he can to get a hold of you so that you will listen and take the gift he's trying to offer you each day. The command is to go through the gate. If we're going to be followers of the way, it's more about our actions, and I love that perspective because for me it's about what do we need to do. We can sit here and debate what's the right thing to think about, but when Jesus says to walk through and enter the gate, it's not just to stand and look at it from the outside. It's not just to think about it, that little narrow gate. It's not just to complain that that gate is far too small. Or, that seems really difficult. I don't think I like that. Or, I think that's unjustly narrow, Jesus. Why's it got to be narrow? Can we flip? How about that's the big easy road, right? Like, I'll take that one. Can I have that life? The big easy one, where everything goes my way and I just slide on down the road? Challenging truth is that we're also not to ask why others are not entering or make excuses or delay walking through the door. And we're not to be concerned with the number of who will or won't enter. We're to strive forward and to enter through the narrow gate. You see, it starts with Jesus in our life and then our actions that result. And we're to try and get the people that we know to strive to get through that narrow door too. So you ready to go through that narrow door? You feel ready? Pumped up? Yeah. I feel like there's still a little piece of me that I don't know if I'm quite there yet. Because I still feel like that one who's not ready, right? I still feel like maybe I'm just not smart enough, right? Like I can't learn from other people's mistakes. Maybe like I'm just not smart enough to get there. What does that really mean? And Jesus' parable from Luke, right? On this journey, he tells a very interesting parable. It has a word for us about doing hard things. It has a word about how to move forward no matter where you're at, no matter who you are, absolutely everyone. It's a beautiful passage. I think we gloss over it too much, and I want to pull something out of here for you. It's the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And this is in Luke 18. It says, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, 'God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, and adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get.' It says, but the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his chest. And he said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.' And Jesus says, 'I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted.'" The first thing I would call your attention to is the audience. It says it right at the outset, right? It says, "To some who were confident of their own righteousness and would look down on other people, 2 men went to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and one a tax collector." And so, the audience, the people who thought, "Yeah, I got it all together. I'm pretty good with my righteousness. I'm not like all these other people." Oh, the life of living by comparison, y'all. It's exhausting. Well, I'm not as bad as that person. I'm a lot better than old so-and-so over here. They're a hot mess. This idea of being and looking down on other people too. Being so kind of self-focused. Being so kind of driven to self all of the time that everyone around, it's like, what, people are like competition? I just think of what a judgmental perspective this could be. And I just think about it's probably all about being right for people like that, right? Like there's not the empathy for somebody's situation or the compassion for your brother and sister. It's just, well, I'm better than that. At least I'm not in your situation. Good luck. But then it talks about the Pharisee that he stands by himself and prays. Let me just read this to you again. "God, I thank you that I'm not like the other people, the robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector." I imagine he's pointing at people when he's saying this. So when I imagine this scene in my head, right, it's like, thank you, God. Like, it's a public performance, right? It's about my own ambition and my own self-focus and my own, how I look to other people, that I'm going to get up in front of everyone to proclaim my greatness and how good I am. And then I imagine that he's just pointing to people, right? Like, thank God I'm not like this guy. In fact, he even says, or even like this tax collector. You know he's pointing at him, right? Like this tax collector right here. How's that guy feeling? That's a bad day. You're called out in front of everybody. And then he says, "I fast twice a week." Twice a week? That's not even called for. This guy's like, I do extra credit, And I want everybody to know it. And I give everything I'm supposed to. I follow all the rules. Look how great I am. Thank goodness I'm not like these other slobs around me. I don't know. Seems like it's a lot for show for me, and that his righteousness is actually more about his own ambition, and it's his own ambition at the expense of others. And so Jesus tells this parable because the lesson in it is not just, what he's trying to really get at in the heart of it is that if you just follow the rules and regulations, sometimes it's like you're just adding stuff up in your weird little bank account. Like you're just kind of like tally marking things up so high, so now you're keeping score, and then you're comparing your score to everybody else around you. What he's trying to communicate to us is that a righteous life, a life connected to God, living the right way, has got to be about more than just comparing ourselves to others. And it's especially toxic when it's my righteousness is based on me being better than everybody else around me. And then it describes someone in a really different situation, right? But the tax collector stood at a distance, like he wouldn't even look up. Right? Why? Because he's ashamed. You got this beat up and broken down tax collector who would have been looked down on because of his position and his, occupation. Like this tax collector. He would have been looked down on, and it says that he beat his chest and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." I looked at that and I was like, anytime the Bible puts in these details, it's like, that seems like an extra detail. I'll tell you, here's a secret to reading your Bible. It's usually there's something to it, usually. These little extra details sometimes give you insight into a passage. When it says he did that, right, in the ancient Eastern world, this was a sign, it was like sorrow. It was like when things, like mourning. Like, in other words, this guy is just sitting there and he's just so sorrowful. He's just so remorseful for the sin in his life. He's like, yep, busted. Dead to rights, you got me. I have messed my life up. This is somebody who thinks I'm the problem, right? Because they're so trapped by sin in their life that I'm a sinner. Guilt and grief and inner pain, right? Like saying, like, my heart is guilty, right? Like this physical and emotional connection of this act. Just like, have mercy on me because I'm just a sinner here. The extreme humility shown by this tax collector that everyone would have looked down on, and that this other guy who's apparently like Captain Amazing over here just publicly shamed him in front of everybody. So not only does he feel this way, but now he's got somebody calling him out in front of everybody there. I mean, just the shame on shame for this poor guy, But his humility comes across because he knows that he's broken. And it's in that he can say, God, have mercy on me. It's kind of a rare image, which is why I like this passage, because, he just says, like, yep, you got me. Many of you know what that feels like. There are many people, either you or somebody you know, who's hit a rock bottom moment in their life. That's this, right? And what's beautiful about Jesus is he comes to us in those moments. I wish I didn't have to learn the hard way and hit that moment. And a lot of people are smarter than that. But some of us have to get right down at the bottom, and we've got to be in that broken place where we can finally say, Jesus, I'm out of other options. You are my option. Remake my life. Because I don't think it's going to continue if you're not there. I just think about that. And this idea of like being the chest, like it was, ancient Near East custom, right? And so there is like a tie to this as you look at the cultural context, beating one's chest. But it's only one other time in Scripture. Anybody know where it's at? It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two, and Jesus called out in a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, surely this was a righteous man. And when all the people who had gathered to witness that sight saw what had taken place, they beat their chest and they went away. To be in that place, right? To be at that rock bottom moment, but to realize the sacrifice that Jesus has made for each one of us, this is the gospel. Jesus goes on in our parable, right, and he closes it out and he says, listen, this is the lesson I'm trying to teach y'all, is that I tell you that this man, rather than the other one, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. How can we be made right? It is only through Jesus in our life. How can I be justified? It is only through Jesus in our life. When he says that the humble will be exalted and the exalted will be humbled, that's what this story is about. Jesus is on his way. Remember, we're moving somewhere in these stories. There is a time and a context to what we're reading. Jesus is ultimately moving toward that cross moment. And he uses this as an opportunity to foreshadow that ultimate sacrifice. That ultimate sacrifice is the thing that makes this broken guy have a future and a life and a hope. The mercy that God gives comes in the form of Jesus' sacrifice. That's his justification of being made right. Jesus' central mission is that humanity cannot achieve righteousness on their own works and effort. This is the way. It's the way of the cross, right? We've got this one guy over here who's broadcasting all his receipts about how great he is, and this other one approaches God in humility, begging for mercy. Jesus' atoning sacrifice, and this is the real hit here. Jesus' atoning sacrifice, okay, is for all people can be reconciled to God. You, me, everyone here, everyone we know, them people over there, right? Like everybody, which is just a wild thought. The contrast between the narrow door and abundantly beautiful grace is right there. What Jesus is saying is that, yes, I am the way, the truth, the life, but if you come to me, I will with open arms welcome absolutely everybody. Anyone can come to me, and I will have paid to make their life right, to give them a new life, to give them a hope and a future, a purpose and a direction and a way forward. All people. And I like that we can be reconciled to God because it's all people. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what mistakes that you've made. It doesn't matter how much of a failure you may feel like. It doesn't matter your social standing or your moralistic standing in front of other people like the Pharisee bragging on everybody. It doesn't matter your history, your mistakes, your struggle. No matter what. Jesus died for each and every one of us. The good news of the Easter season and the message of the cross is to tell us that God came for us, for rescue, for sacrifice and new life. The sacrifice is only meaningful in light of the resurrection, that the new life comes from it, that we would be so built up in the broken places of our life. But know that that's not the end, and we shouldn't stay there. The goal is to live a new life, is to then follow Jesus out of that place into the new life and opportunity He's got for each one of us. Justification is ultimately a gift. I can be made right not because I ignored other people, right, or just made my own rules to life, but I'm justified because God gave me a gift and I accepted it. It's only accessible through repentance and humility through Jesus. The other lesson that this parable teaches us, it's that the way of grace. There's what they call the divine reversal in here, right? That the proud are humbled and the humbled are proud, right? Like, the humbled exalted, the exalted get humbled. This idea that Jesus and the message of the cross is that it flips the whole script on everybody. When you think about that ultimate act of grace, that's what the cross is for us. He takes the punishment, He offers grace to all, and it doesn't matter their standing or merit. And He does it all willingly. I think there's something really cool about those who know their need for God. It says that God is near to the brokenhearted. I think about that guy, right? That God's close to us in those worst moments. And that God says that, sometimes it's mercy is above sacrifice. Like, this man prays for mercy. The other one says, well, I do all the right things. But Jesus' ministry, his parables, the words of a lot of the prophets also say, right, is that God loves mercy over sacrifice, because if you do all the right things but with the wrong heart, if you make all the right sacrifices to follow the regulations, but then you go around belittling everybody around you, trying to make yourself feel better and more important, you miss the mark there. And what Jesus wants for us is a life marked by mercy that we can show to other people. A life marked by mercy that we can show to ourselves, to those hurt places in our life. My question would be, is what good is a sacrifice if it doesn't change the way you live? I think it has to. I think there's also this interesting contrast in the early church, the followers of the way, because they go to the temple for their public worship, and then they gather around the table. That there's temple and table. That there's something about like worshiping in communion with those that believe, those that support us, those that are there for us, those of us that we are stitched together with in community, what we call church. And there's table, which is community also outside. It's about the things that we do as we forgive one another for the small offenses that may happen. Right? That life lived in community is one of the ways that we can show people the love of God. When it talks about being the hands and feet of Jesus, this is talking about how to actually live a life. That's our way forward as we think about it. We can handle the hard stuff because God has transformed us. We can be the hands and feet of Jesus for other people because we've gone through that hard stuff before, and we know ultimately at the end of the day, God can still save them. And sometimes us just being kind in that moment is a thing that changes their perspective and opens their heart to questions. The way of the cross confronts religious elites and shows that self-righteousness blinds them to God's kingdom. The cross is a powerful thing. It's why it's in so many churches today. It's why I wear one, right? When I have conversations with people, I like to wear mine right here, okay? The reason I like to do that is because I feel like this is how God helps me to show up. That in other words, like my life is understood through the lens of a cross. And I want other people to know that. I want other people to know that I want to live my life for something different and something higher and something better, that I want to do the hard things for a purpose, and that I want to be there to care for them because of what God did for me. This whole season of Easter, the cross is one of the best pictures of what the whole Christian thing is all about. Like there's a reason why this is the emblem of Jesus' life. That he knows that he's going to go there, that he willingly goes there, that he does the hard thing, and that he chooses the cross above self. The cross is really the ultimate expression of the greatest humility and sacrificial love that the world will ever know. The cross is the thing that helps bind the brokenhearted because of the sacrifice of God. Don't miss the good news today, which is it's for absolutely everybody. Now, I know Melody really well. I know you set them straight, right? But I want you to think for a moment the people that are in your life who may have that perspective. I want you to think for a moment there's people in your life, and maybe it's you today too. But there are people in your life who have that perspective. A lot of the time, I think, in modern American culture, we take for granted this idea that, like, well, everybody actually knows about Jesus, so we don't really need to talk about it, right? Like it's just understood. The Jesus they know sometimes ain't this Jesus, you know? I think what's beautiful about the Christian perspective is that we matter as part of that process. In other words, the people that are coming to mind for you right now are the people that God's placed in your life for you to potentially have an effect on. You could potentially alter the course of their life by sharing a good word, by explaining what this actually good Jesus does. I can't tell you how many times somebody comes up to me like, oh, well, you're a Christian, so you probably believe blah, 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 blah. And they just spout a bunch of nonsense that I like, no, I don't believe that at all. They have no idea, right? If nothing else today, just take that perspective with you. Is that our people in our world today, they need a message of hope. They need to know that no matter how broken they are, they can be remade. They can be saved. That there is a God who loves them, because that is ultimately the gospel, the good news. That God goes, He makes a way, and when it's hard, we can follow that way. The way forward for us is the hard way. It's doing the hard things. It's pulling people onto the narrow path, right? We're going to rob the wide path. That's my whole game plan. We're going to rob the wide path. We're going to pull people onto this narrow path to show them a better way to live their life, point them to Jesus, help them to find healing and wholeness, because the way forward really is about the hard way. But it's the right way. It's the best way. For me, it's the only way. And that's the gospel today.